Ever wonder how former US presidents travel once they leave office? From luxury jets to humble commercial flights, their journeys are as diverse as their legacies. Let's uncover the surprising ways these once powerful leaders navigate the world when they are no longer in the spotlight. The transition from the most secure and advanced aircraft in the world to commercial flights isn't always smooth, but it's a reality many ex-presidents face as they adjust to life outside the White House. Some embrace the change, while others find creative ways to maintain their jet-setting lifestyles. From private planes to public trains, the travel choices of former presidents often reflect their personalities and priorities. Air Force One. This flying fortress isn't just a plane, it's a symbol of American power and technological prowess. Air Force One is actually the call sign for any Air Force aircraft carrying the president, but it's most commonly associated with two highly customized Boeing 747-200B series aircraft. These planes are decked out with features that would make even the most luxurious private jets look like economy class. First off, let's talk about size. At 4,000 square feet spread across 3 levels, Air Force One is basically a flying White House. It's got a conference room, a medical suite that can function as an operating room, and enough space to carry up to 70 passengers in comfort. But that's just the beginning. The plane's communication capabilities are where things get really impressive. It's equipped with 85 phones, a collection of two-way radios, fax machines, and computer connections. The president can securely communicate with anyone from anywhere in the world, even if ground communication systems are compromised. But what about safety? Well, Air Force One is basically a military-grade fortress with wings. It's outfitted with electronic countermeasures to jam enemy radar, flares to throw off heat-seeking missiles, and armor plating that can withstand a nuclear blast from the ground. The plane's exact defensive capabilities are classified, but it's safe to say it's prepared for just about anything. One of the coolest features of Air Force One is its ability to refuel mid-air. This gives it the potential for unlimited range, meaning the president could theoretically stay airborne indefinitely if needed. It's a capability that came in handy during George W. Bush's presidency, when he used it to secretly visit troops in Iraq for Thanksgiving in 2003. Now, let's talk about Obama's Air Force One experience. During his presidency, Obama flew on a customized Boeing 747 that took luxury and functionality to new heights. One of the most notable features was the medical suite, complete with an operating table, emergency medical equipment, and a doctor on board at all times. This suite ensured that the president could receive top-notch medical care even at 30,000 feet. Obama's Air Force One also included some personal touches. The plane was stocked with the president's favorite snacks, including trail mix, almonds, and Nicorette gum. There was even a special refrigerator just for storing the president's favorite organic vegetables, Trump's golden wings. Now, let's talk about a president who's known for his extravagant taste in pretty much everything, including his mode of transportation. Donald Trump. Before he became the 45th president, Trump was already flying high in his own custom, Boeing 757 dubbed Trump Force One. This wasn't just any private jet, it was a flying testament to Trump's love for luxury and well gold. Trump acquired this aerial palace in 2011 for a cool $100 million, and then proceeded to trick it out in true Trump style. We're talking Italian leather seats, 24-karat gold-plated seatbelts and fixtures, and even a master bedroom fit for Trump himself. The plane became a symbol of his wealth and a key player in his 2016 presidential campaign. It was hard to miss that giant Trump plastered on the side as it jetted from rally to rally. But when Trump took office in 2017, he had to trade in his golden chariot for the more austere but infinitely more secure Air Force One. Gone were the gold fixtures, replaced by advanced communication systems and military-grade defenses. The transition wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a complete overhaul in terms of security and functionality. Trump's new ride came with some serious upgrades. Air Force One isn't just a plane, it's a flying fortress capable of withstanding a nuclear blast from the ground. It's got electronic countermeasures to jam enemy radar flares to throw off heat-seeking missiles and enough high-tech gadgetry to make James Bond jealous. The exact specs are classified, but let's just say it's prepared for pretty much anything short of an alien invasion. But even with all this security, sometimes the best defense is staying under the radar. That's exactly what happened during Trump's secret Thanksgiving trip to Afghanistan in 2019. This mission was so hush-hush that Trump had to ditch both Trump Force One and Air Force One. Instead, he boarded a small, unmarked plane in the dead of night. Picture this: the President of the United States sneaking out of his luxurious Mar-a-Lago resort under the cover of darkness to board a plane at an unlit airport. It's like something out of a spy movie, but this was real life. The plane itself was a far cry from Trump's usual digs, with just 4 blue leather chairs and a makeshift restroom. Talk about downsizing. The crew for this covert mission was minimal, just a handful of staff and a single Fox News journalist, no gold-plated anything in sight. It was a stark reminder that sometimes even the most powerful person in the world has to fly coach, metaphorically speaking, when duty calls. Obama's post-presidency jet-set life. After leaving the White House, Barack Obama wasted no time in embracing a new kind of presidential travel, one that traded Air Force One for billionaire Richard Branson's private jet. Talk about an upgrade in some ways and a downgrade in others. Obama's first post-presidency flight whisked him and his family away to Branson's luxurious private island in the British Virgin Islands. It was a stark contrast to the highly secure and regimented travel he'd grown accustomed to over the previous 8 years. Imagine stepping off the most advanced aircraft in the world with all its high-tech security features onto a sleek private jet. Sure, it's still incredibly luxurious, but suddenly you're not surrounded by a small army of Secret Service agents and staff. For Obama, this flight marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could finally relax and let someone else worry about the details. But don't think for a second that Obama's post-presidency travels are all about luxury and island getaways. In fact, he's expressed a desire to return to simpler travel experiences. Remember the days before he became president? Obama was often seen driving around in a Ford Escape hybrid. It wasn't exactly a head-turner, but it perfectly encapsulated his down-to-earth image and commitment to environmental consciousness. Now you might be wondering if Obama's really going to trade in private jets for economy-class seats and rental cars. The reality is a bit more complex. While he might yearn for those simpler times, the former president still has to balance his desire for normalcy with the very real security concerns that come with being an ex-commander-in-chief. Let's not forget that Obama, like all former presidents, still receives lifelong Secret Service protection. This means that even when he's trying to keep a low profile, there's always a team of highly trained agents watching his every move. So while he might dream of hopping in a Ford Escape and hitting the open road, the reality is that his travels are still carefully planned and executed with security in mind. But here's where things get interesting. Obama's post-presidency travel style seems to be a mix of high-end luxury and attempts at normalcy. On one hand, you've got trips on private jets to exotic locations. On the other, there are reports of the Obama's flying commercial, albeit in first class, and even being spotted waiting in airport security lines like regular folks. This balancing act between luxury and normalcy isn't just about personal preference. It's a reflection of the unique position former presidents find themselves in. They're no longer bound by the strict protocols of the presidency, but they can't exactly blend into the crowd either. Every trip, whether it's a speaking engagement in Europe or a family vacation in Hawaii, requires careful planning and coordination with their security team. Bush's ranch retreat. After the high-flying life in the White House, George W. Bush took a different path. Instead of jetting around the world, he chose to retreat to his beloved Prairie Chapel Ranch in Crawford, Texas. This 600-acre property became Bush's sanctuary, a place where he could trade the pressures of presidency for the simple pleasures of ranch life. Picture this, the former leader of the free world cruising down dusty Texas roads in his 2013 Ford F-150 King Ranch Edition. It's a far cry from Air Force One, but for Bush, it represents freedom. The truck, with its leather interior and Texas-sized presence, is more than just a vehicle. It's a symbol of Bush's down-to-earth persona and his deep connection to the Lone Star State. Bush's choice of wheels isn't just about practicality. The Ford F-150 has been America's best-selling truck for decades, and the King Ranch Edition adds a touch of luxury without being ostentatious. It's the perfect balance for a former president who wants to blend in while still enjoying some comforts. But life after the presidency isn't all about driving pickup trucks and clearing brush. Even when former presidents try to live a normal life, the realities of their former position have a way of creeping in. Take, for instance, the incident in 2013 when Bush's private jet had to make an emergency landing. The Gulfstream 4, carrying the former president from Philadelphia to Dallas, was forced to divert to Louisville, Kentucky, after the smell of smoke was reported in the cockpit. This event serves as a stark reminder that even when former presidents step away from the spotlight, they can't entirely escape the unique risks and challenges that come with their status. It's a sobering thought that even a routine flight can turn into a potential security incident. Speaking of security, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the men in black suits constantly hovering nearby. Bush, like all former presidents, receives lifelong Secret Service protection. This presents an interesting challenge. How do you balance a desire for a normal life with the constant presence of a security detail? For Bush, the answer seems to lie in embracing ranch life while accepting the necessary precautions. His sprawling Texas property provides a degree of privacy and security that allows him to feel at home without completely isolating himself. The Secret Service agents blend into the background as much as possible, allowing Bush to enjoy activities like mountain biking and hosting veterans events on his ranch. Clinton's controversial connections. Clinton's extensive travels are primarily focused on his foundation work, addressing issues like climate change and public health. Noble causes, sure, but the way he's jetting around the world has sparked some serious debates. You see, Clinton isn't exactly flying coach. He's often seen hopping on private jets provided by wealthy friends. It's a far cry from his days on Air Force One, but it's not exactly slumming it either. One name that keeps popping up in Clinton's travel arrangements is Frank D'Souza, a Canadian businessman with deep pockets and even deeper connections. D'Souza has been more than happy to lend Clinton his private jets for various trips. It's the kind of perk that most of us can only dream of, but for Clinton, it's become almost routine. But here's where things get a bit murky. These cozy travel arrangements have raised questions about potential conflicts of interest. When a former president is jetting around on a billionaire's dime, people start to wonder what's really going on behind the scenes. Take, for example, a trip to Kazakhstan in September 2005. Clinton hitched a ride on D'Souza's Boeing 707, ostensibly to help broker some uranium mining deals. Sounds innocent enough, right? Well, it just so happens that shortly after this trip, D'Souza's company secured contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Oh, and did we mention that D'Souza pledged a cool $131 million to the Clinton Foundation around the same time? Talk about convenient timing. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Clinton's use of private jets, particularly those provided by wealthy friends like D'Souza, has been a constant source of controversy. It's not just about the luxury or the environmental impact, though those are certainly factors. It's about the potential for influence peddling and the blurring of lines between personal relationships, business dealings, and charitable work. But wait, there's more. Clinton's travel choices have also come under scrutiny due to his reported connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Flight logs indicate that Clinton was a passenger on Epstein's plane multiple times. Now, before you jump to conclusions, it's important to note that being on someone's plane doesn't automatically imply wrongdoing. But in the court of public opinion, these kinds of associations can be damaging. Adding fuel to the fire, Joanna Scherg, an Epstein accuser, made a disturbing claim about a comment Epstein allegedly made regarding Clinton's preferences. It's the kind of allegation that, true or not, casts a long shadow over Clinton's post-presidency activities and the company he keeps. Carter's humble humanitarian journeys. While some former commanders-in-chief opt for private jets and luxury accommodations, Carter prefers a more humble approach. Picture this: a 98-year-old man, once the most powerful person in the world, patiently waiting in line at airport security, lugging his own carry-on bag. That's right, Jimmy Carter flies commercial, and not just in first class. He's been known to sit in economy alongside everyday travelers. It's a sight that often catches fellow passengers off guard. One minute, you're settling into your cramped seat, preparing for a long flight, and the next, you're doing a double take as the 39th President of the United States asks if you wouldn't mind passing the in-flight magazine. But Carter's down-to-earth travel habits aren't just about saving money or staying grounded. They're a reflection of his lifelong commitment to humanitarian work and environmental consciousness. Since leaving office in 1981, Carter has dedicated himself to global health initiatives, conflict resolution, and promoting democracy worldwide through the Carter Center. One of the Carter Center's most notable achievements has been the near eradication of guinea worm disease. When the center began its work in 1986, there were an estimated 3.5 million cases of this debilitating parasitic infection worldwide. By 2022, that number had dropped to just 13 reported cases. Carter's hands-on approach to this mission has taken him to some of the most remote and underserved areas of the world. Imagine Carter, well into his 90s, trekking through rural African villages, meeting with local health workers and community leaders. He's not there for photo ops or to give lofty speeches. Instead, he's rolling up his sleeves, inspecting water sources, and personally demonstrating how to use cloth filters to prevent guinea worm larvae from spreading. This dedication to on-the-ground work means Carter often finds himself in places far off the beaten path. Commercial flights don't always reach these destinations, so he's had to get creative. Sometimes that means bumpy rides in four-wheel drive vehicles, or even hopping on the back of a motorcycle to reach isolated communities. George H.W. Bush. Unlike some of his predecessors who opted for commercial flights or lavish private jets, Bush found joy in the simple act of piloting his own aircraft. This former Navy pilot and 41st President of the United States never lost his love for the skies, even after leaving the highest office in the land. Imagine the surprise of air traffic controllers when they realized the voice on the other end of the radio belonged to a former commander-in-chief. Bush wasn't content to simply be a passenger in his retirement years. He took the controls whenever possible, relishing the freedom and exhilaration that came with flying. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B for Bush, it was about the journey itself. But Bush's aviation adventures weren't limited to small private planes. He also had access to more luxurious modes of air travel when the occasion called for it. The former president struck a balance between his love of flying and the practicalities of his post-presidential life. When attending official functions or participating in charitable events, Bush would often travel by private jet, ensuring he could fulfill his commitments efficiently and securely. However, what set Bush apart from many of his fellow former presidents was his commitment to maintaining a relatively low profile. Despite having access to the trappings of his former office, Bush often chose simpler, more understated ways of getting around. This approach was evident in his choice of ground transportation as well. While some ex-presidents opt for flashy limousines or high-end luxury cars, Bush was frequently seen driving his own vehicle, a testament to his down-to-earth nature. One of the most telling examples of Bush's modest approach to travel came during a visit from his friend, comedian Jay Leno. Instead of arranging for a chauffeur-driven tour of his Texas ranch, Bush personally drove Leno around in his Ford F-150 pickup truck. This casual, no-frills approach to hosting a celebrity guest speaks volumes about Bush's character and his desire to remain connected to everyday American life. Nixon's diplomatic missions. Richard Nixon's post-presidency travels were as complex and controversial as the man himself. After resigning from office in 1974, Nixon found himself in a unique position. He was no longer the leader of the free world, but he still had a wealth of knowledge and connections that made him a valuable asset in international diplomacy. Nixon's most significant diplomatic mission actually took place while he was still in office. In 1972, he made a historic trip to China, becoming the first US president to visit the communist nation. This journey wasn't just a casual vacation, it was a calculated move that reshaped global politics. Nixon's visit to China opened up diplomatic relations between the two superpowers and paved the way for future cooperation. The trip itself was a logistical marvel. Nixon flew on Air Force One, accompanied by a massive entourage of staff, security personnel, and journalists. The world watched as Nixon stepped off the plane in Beijing, shaking hands with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. It was a moment that would define his presidency and leave a lasting impact on international relations. But what about Nixon's travels after he left office? Well, That's where things get really interesting. Unlike some former presidents who retreat from public life, Nixon saw his post-presidency as an opportunity to rehabilitate his image and continue influencing world affairs. Nixon's post-resignation travels focused heavily on international diplomacy. He visited numerous countries, meeting with world leaders and offering his insights on global issues. These weren't just courtesy calls. Nixon was actively trying to shape foreign policy, even though he no longer held an official position. One of Nixon's most notable post-presidency trips was to the Soviet Union in 1986. At a time when Cold War tensions were still high, Nixon met with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. This wasn't just a casual chat over tea. Nixon used the opportunity to discuss arms control and other pressing issues. It's pretty wild to think about a former president, especially one who resigned in disgrace, having such high-level meetings. But Nixon's travels weren't all about diplomacy. He also used his journeys as a form of personal reflection and redemption. In 1978, he made a private trip to France, where he spent time writing and contemplating his legacy. It's easy to imagine Nixon, the man who once held the highest office in the land, sitting in a Parisian cafe, scribbling notes for his memoirs. Nixon's travel style in his post-presidency years was a far cry from his days on Air Force One. He often flew commercially, though usually in first class. There were no more motorcades or crowds of adoring supporters. Instead, Nixon traveled with a small team of aides and security personnel, trying to maintain a low profile while still making an impact. One of the most fascinating aspects of Nixon's post-presidency travels was how he used them to reshape his legacy. Each trip, each meeting with a foreign leader, was an opportunity to present himself as an elder statesman rather than a disgraced former president. He wrote books about his travels and foreign policy views, further cementing his image as a global thinker. Nixon's approach to travel in his later years shows how a former president can shift from wielding political power to exerting personal influence. He may not have had the authority of the Oval Office behind him anymore, but his experience and connections still opened doors around the world. Johnson's Great Society on the Roadum. Lyndon B. Johnson's approach to travel after his presidency was as big and bold as his personality. Unlike some of his successors who opted for a quieter life, LBJ hit the road with the same energy and determination that characterized his time in office. His travels weren't about luxury or relaxation. They were a continuation of his lifelong mission to reshape American society. Johnson's post-presidency journeys were deeply intertwined with his Great Society initiatives. He crisscrossed the country, visiting communities large and small, to see firsthand the impact of his ambitious domestic programs. From urban centers to rural Appalachia, LBJ was a man on a mission, determined to ensure that his vision for a more equitable America was being realized. These weren't just photo ops or ceremonial visits. Johnson rolled up his sleeves and got into the nitty-gritty of policy implementation. He'd chat with local officials, meet with community leaders, and engage directly with the people his programs were meant to help. It wasn't uncommon to see the former president sitting at a simple kitchen table, listening intently to a family's struggles and successes. Johnson's travel style during these trips was characteristically no frills. He might have been a former president, but he wasn't above staying in modest accommodations or eating at local diners. This down-to-earth approach allowed him to connect more authentically with the communities he visited and reinforced his image as a man of the people. But LBJ's travels weren't all work and no play. He frequently returned to his beloved Texas ranch, finding solace and rejuvenation in the familiar landscape of the hill country. These trips home weren't just about relaxation, they were a chance for Johnson to recharge and reflect on his legacy. The LBJ Ranch, also known as the Texas White House, became a hub of activity during Johnson's post-presidency years. He'd host political figures, journalists, and old friends, using these informal gatherings to stay connected to the pulse of American politics. It wasn't unusual to see LBJ, cowboy hat firmly in place, giving impromptu tours of his property or holding court on his front porch. Johnson's approach to travel emphasized direct engagement with communities. He didn't just want to see the results of his policies on paper, he wanted to hear from the people whose lives were being affected. This hands-on approach allowed him to gather real-world feedback and make adjustments to his programs even after leaving office. One of the most significant aspects of Johnson's post-presidency travels was his continued advocacy for civil rights. He didn't shy away from the controversial issues that had defined his presidency. Instead, he used his trips as opportunities to push for further progress on racial equality and social justice. Johnson's travels also took him to college campuses across the country. Despite the growing anti-war sentiment among young people, LBJ was determined to engage with students and defend his legacy. These visits were often met with protests, but Johnson persevered, believing in the importance of dialogue even in the face of opposition. The former president's dedication to his legislative legacy was evident in every trip he took. Whether he was visiting a Head Start program in New York or a community health center in California, Johnson was there to ensure that the programs he had fought so hard to establish were making a real difference in people's lives. Hoover's global humanitarian efforts. Herbert Hoover's post-presidency travels were a far cry from the luxurious jet-setting we often associate with former leaders. After leaving office in 1933, Hoover embarked on a series of global humanitarian missions that would define his legacy far beyond his time in the White House. These weren't vacations or speaking tours, they were journeys of compassion and service that took him to some of the most war-torn and impoverished regions of the world. Hoover's travels in the years following World War II were particularly impactful. As Europe lay in ruins, Hoover, at the request of President Truman, crisscrossed the continent to assess the food crisis and coordinate relief efforts. Picture this: a 71-year-old former president who could have been enjoying a comfortable retirement, instead choosing to navigate the devastated landscapes of post-war Europe. Hoover visited 38 countries in just 75 days, traveling by plane, train, and automobile to reach even the most remote areas. These weren't just fact-finding missions. Hoover rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He met with local officials, visited refugee camps, and personally oversaw the distribution of food aid. His experience as an engineer and his previous work in famine relief during World War I made him uniquely qualified for this monumental task. Hoover's efforts helped save millions of lives and earned him the nickname the Great Humanitarian. But Hoover's travels weren't limited to Europe. He also turned his attention to Asia, where he worked to address food shortages and promote economic recovery. In 1946, he embarked on a grueling 35,000-mile journey across the region, visiting countries like Japan, Korea, and China. These trips weren't about diplomacy in the traditional sense. They were about using his influence and expertise to improve global conditions. Hoover's approach to travel during these missions was decidedly no frills. He often flew on military transport planes, slept in simple accommodations, and ate the same rations as the people he was trying to help. This wasn't about maintaining a presidential image. It was about getting the job done as efficiently as possible. One of the most remarkable aspects of Hoover's post-presidency travels was his commitment to service well into his later years. Even in his 80s, Hoover continued to travel the world, offering his expertise on famine relief and economic development. His dedication to humanitarian causes never wavered, regardless of the physical toll these journeys must have taken on him. Hoover's travels also served another purpose. They allowed him to reshape his legacy. After leaving office during the Great Depression, Hoover's reputation had taken a hit. But through his tireless humanitarian work abroad, he was able to remind the world of his capabilities as a problem solver and compassionate leader, the Secret Service shadow. When you're a former president of the United States, your days of blending into the crowds are pretty much over. Even after leaving office, these guys are followed around by a constant shadow, the Secret Service. It's not just about keeping them safe, it's about maintaining the dignity of the office they once held. But let me tell you, it's not always easy to balance security with a desire for a normal life. The Secret Service protection for former presidents is no joke. It's a 24/7 operation that continues for the rest of their lives. These agents are always on high alert, scanning for potential threats and planning escape routes. It's like having your own personal team of highly trained ninjas, except they wear suits and earpieces instead of black pajamas. Now, you might think having a security detail would make travel easier. In some ways it does. Former presidents don't have to worry about standing in long TSA lines or fighting for overhead bin space. But it also complicates things in ways you might not expect. Every trip, whether it's a speaking engagement in Europe or a family vacation to the beach, requires extensive planning and coordination. Imagine trying to have a spontaneous night out on the town when you've got a team of agents that need to sweep the area first. Or picture yourself trying to enjoy a quiet dinner at a restaurant while your security detail clears out half the place for your safety. It's not exactly conducive to living a normal life. Some former presidents handle this better than others. Jimmy Carter, for example, is known for his down-to-earth approach. He's been spotted flying commercial and carrying his own luggage. But even for someone as humble as Carter, the presence of Secret Service agents is a constant reminder of his former status. Others, like Bill Clinton, have found ways to work around the restrictions. Clinton's known for his love of retail politics, and he's managed to maintain a level of public interaction that keeps his security detail on their toes. There are stories of Clinton stopping his motorcade to chat with people on the street or popping into local businesses unannounced. It's a headache for his protection team, but it's just part of who Clinton is. Then there's the issue of privacy. Former presidents are still entitled to some semblance of a personal life, but it's hard to feel truly alone when you've always got agents nearby. Even simple things like going for a jog or playing a round of golf become complex operations involving multiple vehicles and pre-planned routes. One of the most challenging security situations for a former president's travels occurred during George W. Bush's trip to Iraq in 2008. Bush was still in office at the time, but the incident highlights the kind of security nightmares that can occur even after leaving the White House. During a press conference in Baghdad, an Iraqi journalist suddenly stood up and threw both of his shoes at Bush. The president managed to duck, and his Secret Service agents quickly subdued the journalist. But the incident showed just how unpredictable and potentially dangerous public appearances can be, even with extensive security measures in place.